Welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Akerman. We are broadcasting, as always, and very proudly, from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. I'm so glad that you joined us this morning. We have so much to talk about. We're going to be talking about the trial on day 2 of deliberations starting today. We have quite a few things here about Israel, the Biden campaign, just a myriad of issues this morning. I don't know why I'm starting with this, and I hope I'm going to keep it clean because I know you may be eating breakfast this morning. But after their failed satellite launch, did you see what North Korea did? They sent 260 balloons carrying garbage and other, we'll just say, filth into neighboring South Korea. Now, they said it was in retaliation for an earlier balloon barrage sent in the other direction by South Korean activists carrying anti-regime leaflets and K-pop music, which is a lot. Well, I don't know if you want to call K-pop music filth. I wouldn't do that. So I don't think it's an equal retaliation. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the North's action violates international law and seriously threatens the safety of our citizens. So from what was supposed to be a somewhat big story of a satellite launch is now resorted to balloons being sent over the border. I just found that very curious, and I don't know why I decided to start the show with that. It is no indication of what this program will be like this morning. Just to show you the difference before we get into the campus protests, there was a student in Kentucky, a high school student, Micah Price, probably Micah, right? Micah Price. He went off script during his graduation speech. Now, instantly you're saying, uh-oh. Because when we see people go off script, it's normally a very kind of anti-Semitic speech being given. And this is, in fairness, this is in high school. This isn't a college. He went off script praising Jesus. And that cost him his diploma. Now, and again, to be fair and not report this like the pro-Palestinian protest, he knew what he was doing was on paper wrong. And he admitted that. He received the green light to praise Jesus Christ in his commencement speech, but went a little bit further in a part of his speech than was originally approved. He said, "Class, before another word leaves my mouth, I must give the honor, the praise, and the glory to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ." Now, this was at a packed Truist Arena at Northern Kentucky University. His oration, received a resounding applause from the audience before he continued his holy message. Who in his very words tell us he is the light, he is the way, the truth, and life. Class, anyone in the audience today, I'm here to tell you that if you don't have any of those things in your life and can't seem to find the answer, then my Lord and Savior is your answer. While this was a shift from what was approved, the school reprimanded Price and denied him his diploma. He admitted on TikTok, he said, after the speech was over, one of the principals came in, tapped me on the shoulder very politely and professionally, and told me that I was going to have to go in front of the board and explain what I did because I went off script. The school district had allowed him in the pre-approved script to thank his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. All speakers were told that going off their submitted speech or any unplanned choices at graduation may have repercussions as they would at any school function. What's interesting about this, and you see both sides of it. It's nice to see a completely different message than what we've been seeing on college campuses. But here's an example of maybe you can look at it two ways. Someone taking a stand for their belief in a much different fashion, and also the administration actually cracking down. That's, I would say, the difference that is kind of unique in this instance. Price said that he had no bad blood with Campbell County or the principals, as they were just doing their job. He did receive his diploma on Wednesday after a long holiday weekend. Holding it is just an answered prayer. That's all it is. just an answered prayer, Price said. The incoming U.S. Air Force Academy cadet says he has no regrets and would do it again ×2. So something completely different from what we've been hearing at so many levels, not just in academia. And we do have some updates on that, but just something maybe on a more positive note, positive on two sides. The message, and positive that you see an administration actually crack down. You question, and he says there's no hard feelings there. I question what would happen if it were a message that is very in right now, which is if you're the media, pro-Palestinian, many would say anti-Israel type protest. But just something to change it up a little bit. But moving on and piggybacking off of that to something that's more in line with what we've been talking about. Adam B. Coleman, we've talked about him a lot. He writes for the New York Post. He's the author of Black Victim, the Black Victor. He says, memo to companies, sports teams, colleges, shut up about politics. Now, and it's a really good piece that he has here. That's been said for so long, to kind of go woke, go broke. But they're not adhering to that suggestion, as we've seen time and time again. He says progressivism ages like milk, and Americans don't have a taste for spoiled products served by spoiled leftists. Now, institutions like Harvard are realizing that there is a shelf life to their ideology, that their constant need to step into every political and cultural issue has only put a bad taste in all our mouths. Tuesday, Harvard's new work group announced that they will no longer be vocal on public issues that don't impact their institution's core functions. According to their new policy, Harvard leaders will debate when it would be appropriate for the university to make public statements while keeping their core functions as the North Star for their decisions. But you heard my theory on this yesterday if you tuned in. The reason that they've taken this stance is not because it was in response to the anti-Semitic protests, to the hate that was being spewed and the intimidation on Jewish students. The problem was because they received, in my opinion, so much backlash when they stood up for Israel after the October 7th attack. That did happen, and many student groups came out and denounced those statements. So I think it's really more in response to, we made a mistake there. We didn't know where the leftist students were going to go with this, and we picked wrong. We were on the wrong side of this one. We should have went pro-Hamas, I guess. So now they're saying maybe it's not worth weighing in on any issue. I won't hold my breath. Just like with this message that Adam B. Coleman has, I won't hold my breath that companies and sports teams and colleges will wake up. But he said Harvard, like many of us, suffers from the impulsivity of our modern, overly opinionated culture. Social media scolds believe that saying nothing is weakness and proclaiming your stance is a necessity. And that's something we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, where the Biden administration, much like campaign, much like the Clinton campaign before him, wants to draft Hollywood celebrities into their campaign. And one of the points that CNN makes is that Hollywood celebrities aren't sure how to handle this because you have Biden, who's being called Genocide Joe by young people. But they're concerned about that, the negativity, maybe the stigma against them if they do endorse Joe Biden. But also there's that problem, and this is where those on the left get into a lot of trouble. It's not just what you say, it's if you don't say anything. The influencers say, well, if you're not giving a full-throated endorsement to this pro-Hamas message, that must mean you don't agree with us. We have to boycott or go after this person. That happened early on before this superstardom of Taylor Swift, but early on there was a lot of calls and a lot of upset supporters of hers that said you're not getting involved in politics enough. But that's a double-edged sword because you have that risk of losing other people that don't want to be lectured about political issues all the time, which is, I would argue, the majority of people. So Adam B. Coleman says, even when you choose to forego adhering to this new cultural norm, bad faith actors will translate your desire to remain neutral as being fearful of choosing a side And they will ultimately decide where you stand anyway, which will be on the opposite side of what they believe. It'll be of the, well, you must be, in this case, pro-Israel. Heaven forbid. The days of accepting that everyone has an opinion that they should probably keep to themselves have been swapped out for a new era where you have to preach every thought that streams through your mind. Instead of silence, we must now deal with ego-driven activists of the day who regurgitate unoriginal slogans that they plagiarize from the playbooks of political partisans. And what a great line, and that's why I mentioned this. I know I'm already running late, but that's such a great line. The people, that, and you've heard me say this before, if someone says one radicalized chant that is already cliche that they stole from somebody else, the next person has to take it a step further so they look like they're more radical, that they're more woke. It happens nearly every time where, one person goes up with their zip ties at graduation to protest, and the next person says, okay, I'm going to do zip ties, and I'm going to rip up my diploma because I want to show I care more. I want to be the center of attention. I want everybody in this room to know that I care the most about whatever this politicalized message is. And keep in mind, like he said, much of it coming, if not all, from political partisans. They're really writing the script that these protesters or companies are stealing. Entities do not need to take a stand, he writes, on anything that doesn't directly impact them, and for the vast majority of social issues, political endeavors, and foreign conflicts. Because most of these issues don't affect them, they are also not part of the solution, and they end up becoming politically divisive for no long-term benefit unto themselves. And that's very much like the protests on college campuses. What was the end game? We heard that young person complain as she went on a hunger strike that she was, you guessed it, hungry. She was complaining about that as if she felt, when she declared she was going on a hunger strike, that the Middle East would clear up. There'd be peace in the Middle East because they'd say, we don't want this person who the world is centered on, who the sun rises and sets on. The most important person in the world is this person's feelings, so we will declare peace in the Middle East. I mean, that's the narcissism level from many of these protesters. And keep in mind, a lot of them young people, kind of the participation trophy generation that is always told how amazing they are, how great they are, they could do anything. So why wouldn't they think that if I say my tummy hurts because I haven't ate breakfast in a couple days, well, why wouldn't everybody stop what they were doing to coddle them? He said, and this is Adam Coleman again, as an avid sports fan, the hyper-racial and political rhetoric coming from sports leagues and entertainment back in 2020 forced me to abandon a pastime that I'd spent decades enjoying. Sports leagues like the NBA and NFL spread narratives that I and many others did not agree with, and they turned athletic giants into whiny activists who performed useless gestures while wearing leftist swag. Harvard has a responsibility to itself, not the rest of society, but the problem is that many within the walls hold an elitist mentality that convinces them to embrace being uniquely tasked with dictating the direction of our society. Hopefully this is the first step to getting over Hopefully this is the first step of getting over themselves. Unfortunately, I think that article is great by Adam Coleman. Unfortunately, I disagree that it will lead to anything, or not disagree. I don't think he took a strong stance on it, but I don't think it leads to anything because really, I believe the reason that they have changed their policy is because they realized they made a mistake being pro-Israel early on, and then they saw what happened on these college campuses. So they made a mistake there when they should have been on the other side, which is, I don't know how else you can look at it, pro-Hamas. So they realized, we better relax and not always knee-jerk because we want to be on the right side of these leftist protesters. So now I'm running late. Now we've got only a few things on this morning, but we are going to tie it in with Israel. We're going to not tie it in, but we're going to talk about the trial entering day 2 of deliberation, which will kick off at 9:30 this morning, if that interests you. But right now, let's take our first break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking. And we are back with Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I forgot to mention when I was doing my housekeeping at the start of the hour, our Steuben Senior Services Fund section of the program today, We're going to be talking with Jake and Katie from Reese Rodeo. You're going to have some fun. You might not have even known. There is a rodeo in Corning, 4115 Oldfield Drive. It's on the way to Watkins Glen. You can find out more at reesranchrodeo.com. But also to find out more, stay tuned, because we're going to be talking with Jake and Katie in the 7 o'clock hour. We don't have a lot of time in this segment because I'm running late, but there's quite a lengthy piece here by Martin Gurry. And the argument that Martin makes is that a small group of elites are letting small group of college idiots drive policy. And he shows kind of the organizations involved in these college campuses and the faculty and the staff and the like. And he made some really good points in this, essentially saying that the knee-jerk from the colleges originally were that it was something like the second coming of the Black Lives Matter protests, and they didn't want to be on the wrong side of it. As with the BLM riots, the elites were terrified of doing or saying the wrong thing. To keep their jobs in the coming age of the Zoomer, they felt they needed to tread carefully. But this was not true, according to Martin's theory. Now, before we get into that, that is the idea, that they don't want to pick the wrong side because they look at these students as cash cows. They don't want to lose their jobs. These students are very vocal. So if you do, like to my point in the last segment, if you're to Harvard and you originally come out in support of Israel after that terrorist attack, and it turns out these students are pro-Hamas terrorist attacks in some ways, if you take that wrong stance, you can lose your job. These protesters will call for this list of demands, and one of this list of demands will be your head on a platter, out as university, whatever your title may be. But I think we make a mistake in this piece if we accept the fact, and he's maybe not wrong here, but that he says the numbers are few of the protesters. The original Gaza Solidarity encampment was said to be the work of about 70 activists. News reports never mentioned more than hundreds of students involved, and the abundant video taken of the episode shows this to be a generous estimate. Columbia has 31,000 students. The protesters never came close to 1/100th of that total. But still, they are the one controlling the policy. They are the one controlling the narrative. So yes, it is a small group, but it's a small, very, very vocal group. And we do ourselves a disservice if we ignore it or laugh it off. Because look, let's face it, the Biden administration changed their policy towards Israel because of these activists. So I don't care if it's 30 people or 3,000 people, it's still forming public policy and America's policy on Israel. So I appreciate the point here, but it's just like blaming everything on outside agitators. Yes, there are a lot of outside agitators. I agree. It's not all the students, but we've got to focus on what is happening on these college campuses, because the authority figures are listening to them, even if they are a small group. By authority, I mean the faculty or the president or whomever. So we can't shrug it off as just 30 people and then the rest are outside agitators. If we do that, you see things like this grow in size and in number. And I do believe we have seen that to an extent. But I thought Martin made a good point, saying the young rebels at Columbia had no wish to overthrow a society they expected to rule by birthright as an inheritance from mom and dad. Yes, because these are elitist Columbia students. The point of protesting was to out-virtue the competition on the way to the top. And that has been my argument right along. It is to be, again, because of the narcissism, to be the most woke out of any of their classmates. It would be safe, I think, to assume that the protesters represented nothing higher than themselves. Yeah, I don't think they knew what they were really protesting, but it's a herd mentality where one person wants to be the most virtuous, so the rest join on to out-virtue the originators. A disproportionate number of these protesters were women. That accords with the Zoomer facts of life. The women of the coherent skew sharply left, the guys skew right. The cohort, did I say coherent? Women of the cohort skew sharply left, the guys skew right. But then he goes on to talk about the intimidation and the attacks on Jewish students, and he doesn't downplay, but he said, how did the offspring of our ruling class fall into such a distempered mental condition? The vast majority, truth be told, were simple herd animals, devoid of moral anchors, eager to repeat whatever inane slogan the activists put in their mouth. The student protesters at Columbia were a tiny subset of the student body. The most powerful motivation for that subset was mindless conformity rather than humanitarian zeal. Still, among the main organizers of the protest, he found Students for Justice for Palestine, a group that is normally anti-Zionist but is in fact pro-Hamas, and when the mask slips, rabidly anti-Semitic. And there's a lot more there. If you want to find it for yourself, it's by Martin Gurry. Again, I think there's some really good points in there, but I don't think, and maybe that's why we focused so much on it here, that I just think there's more here, because think of how many things have changed from many of these protests throughout the years, by policy, by going back to the original point, how media is driven, how celebrity is driven, political campaigns. So yes, it is a small amount, but that is a small vocal minority that is really powerful enough and obnoxious enough to change a lot of policies. So I don't think we should just brush it off. We've got a few other things on this. It's not going to be the whole focus of the show. We've got some waves coming in. Thank you. And we've got some comments we'll get to in just a little bit. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox, broadcasting from the Hesselson studio. Comment from a viewer. Sadly, those in power listen to a minority who yell the loudest. That's exactly to that point. So it is a small vocal group of protesters, but that small vocal group is the one that has the power, and that's why I don't think you can brush it off. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, he dramatically ripped off his Harvard hood at Yeshiva University's commencement, saying he is profoundly disappointed in Harvard University's inability to address anti-Semitism. The Pennsylvania Democrat expressed his disapproval with the Ivy League school during his commencement address for the private Orthodox Jewish university, which bestowed him with its Hero of Israel Award. Can I just say something? That's very interesting. Fetterman has been very good, very outspoken on his support of Israel. But it's amazing that you receive the Hero of Israel Award just for being a Democrat that stands with Israel at this point. I mean, kudos to the university for giving it to him. I'm not knocking them. I just think it's interesting that it's still, being a university, it still takes a Democrat to get the award. But I do think it's very telling of where the Democrat Party is headed. But he said, I've been profoundly disappointed in Harvard's inability to stand up for the Jewish community after October 7th. Personally, I do not fundamentally believe that it is right for me to wear this today. And he removed the Harvard hood, identifying him as an alum, from around his neck. The Jewish community everywhere deserves our support, and I promise you will always have mine. His remarks were well received, and he was spotted dancing with students and school leaders after delivering his speech. He also said, not just to talk about Fetterman so much, but he was on Morning Joe. And he said that while the deaths of civilians in the strike were awful and heartbreaking and a tragedy, there is truth about this war. And that's what Hamas, those cowards, hide behind civilians. And I wish more, and the media doesn't like when this is brought out, they would rather quote the PR wing of Hamas. But he's exactly right. Hamas, the cowards, hide behind civilians. And now it's become more and more. And now it's becoming more and more. There was a dump of munitions there that exploded. That's where Hamas is hiding them. And that added more damage as well. So I don't understand why, if Hamas wants peace, they could have taken the ceasefire deal a couple of weeks ago, or they could surrender right now if they were concerned about it. But they're all about trying to hang on because there's no connection with the suffering of Palestinians. They don't seem to care how many die or anything. But I do believe Israel does try to minimize that. It's a very difficult war when they have to wage a war when they have Hamas hiding behind the civilians. Yes, Hamas doesn't care one bit about the Palestinians, about the civilians. It's all about their terrorist ambitions, for lack of a better word. But yeah, that's one thing that's always overlooked, and we keep talking about on this program, but the media does not like to even admit the fact that Hamas started this during a ceasefire on October the 7th. There's so much of this Democrat infighting, again, that he receives the Hero of Israel Award at that university. because he is outspoken in support of Israel and he's a Democrat. And I think that tells you a lot of where the Democrat Party is today. And it's not just at the Washington level. In New York, Democrat on Democrat tension builds over that bill that I talked to you about last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that targets pro-Israel charities. And it's backed by AOC, even though AOC can't vote for it in Albany, of course. But it's created infighting in Albany. It's a non-starter, and the speaker's position has not changed. Speaking of Assemblyman Speaker Carl Hastie. And his counterpart in the state Senate has also refused to consider the bill. But yet, Wednesday, hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters rallied in Albany for the bill, then sponsored by Democratic Socialist lawmaker, Assembly member Zoran Mamdani, and Senator Jabari Brispor, who represent sections of Queens and Brooklyn. The impasse over the bill is the latest indication of how the Israel-Gaza war continues to pit the left flank of the Democrat Party against establishment members. I think Jewish legislators are feeling that the whole world has turned against them to a large degree, as Jews, not as legislature, said Assembly member Amy Pollin. We don't feel it here. We don't feel it in that conference. We work together as colleagues. Those kind of divisive issues rarely come up. But I like at the end this piece. As always, it's the Republicans are going to exploit this and use this. Republican state lawmakers are eagerly using the measure as an example of how state Democratic leadership, despite refusing to entertain the bill, well, that's only 2 people that refused that, but anyway, needs to do more to rein in the pro-Palestinian lawmakers. I would hope that our colleagues on the other side would not allow the extreme left wing of their party to control the agenda when it comes to attacking a community in our state. Is it the extreme left wing, or is it a part of the establishment now? And I ask that question because Biden seems to really be catering towards this kind of anti-Israel section of the party. It sure comes up a lot. There's, like I said, Fetterman won an award for being outspoken for Israel. So it just very, I think they may be trying to still downplay it in the media because they realize how bad the optics are to the American people. Now, good, I got time. And because I don't want to spend the whole hour on this. I'm not going to, but this now ties into our policy on Israel. The New York Post has a really good editorial this morning, and it says, somehow or other, in the twisted logic of Biden world, fighting inflation requires green spending that also funds anti-Israel hate. Now, I think most of us would agree that maybe fight inflation, stop spending our money, exorbitant amounts of money. That's right, under environmental justice grants funded in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden Environmental Protection Agency awarded $50 million to the Climate Justice Alliance. Now, the Climate Justice Alliance's own website proclaims, quote, the path to climate justice travels through a free Palestine. Now, if you recall that piece we had for you a while ago, talking about how many have taken up the Free Palestine movement as to encompass everything. Transgender rights. I think there was an overweight, I don't know what their official term was, an overweight group that took it up. And in this case, climate justice. It's really weird. So the path to climate justice travels through a free Palestine. Climate justice, I like that term too. Justice. So this is a global warming group, anti-global warming group. A video even lays out an anti-colonial framework to show how climate justice and the liberation of Palestine are connected, namely the usual blather about settler colonialism, white supremacy, imperialism, and militarism. I don't know if that's how you say that. That's not how you say it. Militarism. Thank you. Okay, militarism. Mind you, the EP... Now, keep in mind, we as tax dollars gave them $50 million with this group. Mind you, the EPA made the grant in December, months after Hamas's October 7th atrocities, which the Climate Justice Alliance has never bothered to condemn. Never. Notice that. A lot of these pro-Palestinian groups never really find the time to denounce that October 7th terrorist attack. As a matter of fact, as we mentioned with Harvard, when Harvard denounced the attacks, many students said it was justified, the attacks. Remember that. So, again, Climate Justice Alliance never bothered to condemn the October 7th attacks. Though by October 20th, it was already calling for a ceasefire. Now, this has something to do with global warming. To save the planet, our tax dollars are going to this $50 million of our tax dollars are going to this Climate Justice Alliance. Their 90-member network includes such groups as the NDN Collective, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, and Demilitarize. Demilitarize? I don't know. It's like it's got caps and one of those weird things, which opposes imperialism and aim to defund the police, the criminal justice system, and the military. So not just defund the police, we want to get rid of the criminal justice system in general and the military, all in the name of fighting global warming. And also, Biden tells us, because of it coming from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, to fight inflation. Did the Biden EPA not vet the CJA or just not care? Count this as just another way President Biden or his handlers have seized every opportunity to throw taxpayer dollars at far-left groups and causes, dressing it up as supposedly serving the general good. In other words, Team Biden aims to grab every buck it can for its allies on the flimsiest of pretexts, no matter how much debt it's piling on to the next generation, nor how much inflation it actually causes. Yet somehow they claim the other team is the threat to democracy. Let's take a short break. Got some comments coming in, some waves. Keep them coming. Thank you for joining us this morning. Just a few other things kind of tying in with all this, and then we're going to move on. A lot about the presidential race, obviously a lot about the Trump trial. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Just to show you, though, when it comes to these protesters on college campuses becoming sort of the useful idiot, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, first of all, known for suppressing demonstrators in the Islamic Republic, expressed his support for the protests on college campuses. Dear university students in the United States of America, you are standing on the right side of history. You have now formed a branch of the resistance front and have begun an honorable struggle in the face of your government's ruthless pressure, which openly supports Zionists. I, too, empathize with you young people and value your perseverance, he wrote. Well, maybe, I'm sure a lot of, you're probably saying, oh my goodness, wouldn't that be shocking? I'm sure a lot of these protesters take this as a badge of honor. Dear university students in the U.S., my advice to you is to become familiar with the Quran. So there you go. Talk about that, and that's the side that they're on. So when we say anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-American, they just got their endorsement from Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, and the question's being asked, why is Biden trying to cover for Iran's massive nuclear violations when we talk about Iran? We brought this story to you earlier in the week that the Biden administration is saying to our allies, do not bring up that Iran is increasing their nuclear capabilities. We don't want to ruffle any feathers before November. We don't want to cause any more troubles. We've got to worry about votes. Not only is the Biden administration bent on turning a blind eye to terror supporter Iran's world-dominating nuclear ambitions, it's pushing our allies to ignore them as well. The Wall Street Journal reports that European diplomats say U.S. officials have been trying to talk Britain and France out of censoring Iran at the International Atomic Energy Agency's board meeting next week. We brought this to you early in the week or late last week. As we know, with the enriched uranium, Iran is on the brink of enough fuel for 3 nuclear weapons. U.S. officials deny running cover for Iran, of course, but it fits into the appeasement at all cost strategy with Iran that was originally implemented by, or not originally, I should say, is President Biden's strategy with Iran. Never mind national security, never mind our allies' security. Since taking office, Biden has refused to enforce on-the-books sanctions against Iranian oil buyers, letting the regime amass billions and so freeing up cash to fund terrorist proxies and buy more uranium. And this has been a common trend from Biden throughout even his Senate career. Many saying he's always been on the wrong side of history when it comes to foreign policy decisions. There's this idea that we can appease Iran, that we can be buddies and pals with Iran if we just let them be free and I guess making their nuclear weapons. He all but ignored more than 160 attacks, and the media really did too, on U.S. forces by Tehran proxies until an attack that killed 3 soldiers and injured 40 more forced him to respond. And then weeks later, approved sanction waivers that gives Iran continued access to the $10 billion he released from previously inaccessible bank accounts in 2023. And he downplayed Iran's attack of more than 300 drone and missile strikes on Israel in April, urging the Jewish state not to retaliate. Remember, he said to Iran at the time, don't. And they did. And yes, who was it? John Kirby, who said, well, he said don't, and they did, but did they really? It wasn't successful. 300 drone and missile strikes. Anyway, now as Iran continues to hoard uranium, flout international red lines, and inch ever closer to building a nuclear weapon, Biden officials are again proving that the White House is terrified of stepping on Tehran's toes. With the Ayatollahs are surely taking note of. Yes, they're laughing at, just as they're laughing at the demonstrators. That's why they tweeted out yesterday that they support them. They're laughing at what is happening here at home. After all, what do they have to be afraid of? Biden saying don't? I guess I'm not the only one. I know I wasn't. But noticing that how obnoxious that don't thing is getting. Instead of using U.S. strength and influence to force Iran's leaders into submission, Biden still imagines he can placate them into playing nice. An approach that has only produced more aggression, including those proxy attacks on U.S. bases and troops across the Mideast, as well as the acceleration of the nuke program. Yeah, they laugh at it. They see it and exploit that weakness. It's not about, the niceness is not perceived as strength in any way, or they don't want to be our friends. How can someone want to be your friend if they call you the great Satan? Come on. Biden's personal stake is obvious. God forbid oil prices spike again before the November election. France and Britain are right to try to bring the hammer down on the out-of-control Ayatollahs, if only our terrorist-appeasing president will get out of their way. That's from the New York Post editorial board. Got to take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio this morning, as always. One last thing on Iran, and then we're going to move along to the presidential election, talk about Trump's trial at the top of the hour. Also, as a reminder, we will be talking with Jake and Katie from Reese Rodeo. You're going to like this interview. I really believe that. We've been changing up with interviews lately, all over the place with fun, informative interviews, and I really appreciate everybody coming on the program. Just to tie in with this appeasement of Iran and this trying to, it's not going to work, and how scary that is for national security, all in the name of winning the election in November. But this is also troubling as well. So we've got Iran increasing their nuclear capabilities, and here we have Biden's special envoy to Iran, Robert Malley. There is now a congressional probe into Mr. Malley because there have been evidence uncovered that the State Department official may have shared classified material with people outside the U.S. government. The evidence found by Republican lawmakers indicates that Malley, who was quietly placed on unpaid leave last June and had his security clearance suspended 2 months prior, disseminated sensitive documents with allies of his in order to, quote, advance his diplomatic efforts related to Tehran. GOP lawmakers have learned that Malley transferred about a dozen documents, including some marked sensitive and classified, to his personal devices while tasked with leading the Biden administration's diplomatic relations with the U.S. adversary. Does this all tie in together? The documents reportedly included detailed notes of his interactions with Iranian officials in the months before his suspension and material related to the U.S. government's response to the 2022 protests in Iran. This is a troubling allegation. Just that when you tie this in with everything else, again, we know about it now. The media, not the New York Post and some other outlets, but the media won't cover it. Anything leading up to November, especially this major, just like we talked about the what looked like a terrorist attack test run on that Marine base. Those are the kind of things that the media are going to shy away from. We'll put it that way as we lead into November. Specifically, we understand that Mr. Malley's security clearance was suspended because he allegedly transferred classified documents to his personal email account and downloaded these documents to his personal cell phone. It is unclear to whom he intended to provide these documents, but it is believed that a hostile cyber actor was able to gain access to his email and or phone and obtain the downloaded information. So again, just to reiterate, as we talk about the Biden administration telling our allies not to give any grief to Iran for increasing their potential nuclear capabilities. We just want to appease them before November. Add on top of that, the Biden suspended Iran envoy may have improperly shared classified material, according to a report. So that covers mostly covers our international discussion this morning. We do have a lot of issues here about the Biden campaign. We'll probably jump right into the Trump Trump trial, which deliberates again today, starting at 9:30 this morning. There's some. I've had some people ask me, well, what could this mean? What happens if he's found guilty? We have an update for you on that, just to fill you in if you're not familiar. A couple things that the jury's looking at. A couple ways the media is spinning everything. We are going to talk about just the campaign in general. RFK Jr. is in the news. He's accusing CNN of stifling him from going to the debate, just as we predicted. That's why it was set up the way it was. That's why the commission wasn't involved, because they didn't want, both parties didn't want Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be a part of that debate. So we've got that. One other thing before I go. No, I'm doing good. Okay. As we talk about election news, just quickly, I want to give you this poll. And this ties in with what we've been talking about with the young people on college campuses. And to that viewer's point, that really they're maybe a small group, but they're very, very vocal. They're very loud. And those are the ones we've been talking about with the anti-Semitic protests. But just in general, we've heard that if you look at the numbers in the polls, that the Middle East is very low on concerns for young voters. Well, according to Semaphore, America's youth is jaded. When asked the question in a poll, asking whether they agree or disagree with this following statement. Okay, so this is young people. Does it say what? Gen Z and younger millennials in the poll. So it's 18 to 30-year-old registered voters. It doesn't matter who wins elections. Nothing changes. Agree or disagree. 20% strongly agreed, 28% somewhat agreed. So you've got 48% of young people believe it doesn't matter who wins elections, nothing changes. Now, to show you kind of that that lack of concern, that kind of agnostic political attitude, 26% neither agree nor disagree. They just don't know. Now you're wondering how many disagree with the statement of it doesn't matter who wins elections, nothing changes. You had somewhat disagree 13% and strongly disagree 13%. So 26%. So the same amount that neither agreed nor disagreed. That does sound jaded. They were asked a lot of questions. Participants were to respond to a series of questions about American political system. 49% agreed to some extent that elections in the country don't represent people like them. 51% agreed to some extent that the political system in the U.S., quote, doesn't work for people like me. And 64% backed the statement that America is in decline. So 64% of young people ages 18 to 30 back the statement that America is in decline. 65% agreed either strongly or somewhat strongly that nearly all politicians are corrupt and make money from their political power. Only 7% disagreed. Now, I think the 64% that back that America is in decline, I think that's troubling. I think that's look, let's face it. You see a speech from the President of the United States like we saw at Morehouse that is how bad this country is and how the system's rigged against everyone. You can't have that constant negative message and not see the implications from it. 64% America is in decline. Wow. Now, I don't know. I'm sure many of us would probably fall in line with the 95% agreed that nearly all politicians are corrupt or make money from their political power. But it says nearly. So I don't think that's that strong of an opinion. The lead pollster, Evan Ross Smith, said, I think these statements blow me away, the scale of these numbers with young voters. Young voters do not look at our politics and see any good guys. They see a dying empire led by bad people. Well, troubling, but something we have to keep in mind. And just like we said when we tied in with the protesters, we got to take our last short break of this hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. And we are back and nearly out of time for hour number 1 of Frankly Speaking. But again, thank you for joining us. Coming up in the next hour from Reese Rodeo in Corning, which is on the way to Watkins, Jake and Katie Reese will be joining me in the Steuben Senior Services Fund section of the program, so don't miss that. But we're going to end on a positive note, and that's going to be a positive note, talking with them in the next hour. Before we get into the Trump trial in the next hour and some other things, Phil Palmisano, Assemblyman Palmisano, welcome back. I meant to mention this on the program yesterday. Welcome back the former Assemblyman Jim Bacalus to the Assembly Chamber. Now, Assemblyman Bacalus was served from 1995 through 2010. Before that, mayor of Corning for 4 years, Steuben County Legislature for 10 years. So here's the picture back in the Assembly. I thought you'd appreciate that. Assemblyman Palmisano saying it was an absolute honor to welcome back to Albany not only my predecessor, but my former boss, mentor, and friend, Jim Bacalus. I had the great privilege to work for Jim for 9 years. I learned so very much from him. Jim worked tirelessly to help the constituents he served in the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes region. The most important thing Jim taught and demonstrated to me every day was you certainly could be honorable and serve in politics. Jim truly epitomized what it meant to be a public servant. When I was first elected, I knew I had big shoes to fill, and I hope when all is said and done, I will have lived up to the expectations of public service Jim Bacalus demonstrated and set for the people of the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes. There you go. I thought that was a nice way to end the first hour. And like I said, I meant to mention that the other day, but I thought I got a kick out of that press release. Okay. We are going to be talking about the rodeo in the next hour with Reese Rodeo. Also, I do want to thank our guest from yesterday. That it was nice to talk about Colonial Days. It got a lot of attention online too. Colonial Days coming up starting on June 6th in Painted Post. We are going to spend tomorrow's program, Friday show, just catching up on everything. I don't know if we'll have a decision in the Trump trial. We will see. But tomorrow we're just going to be catching up on a lot of things. So anyway, I've set the scene. Let's start hour number 2. Just mere moments away. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. It is hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. It is 7 o'clock in the morning. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and let's talk about the Trump trial. If you're just joining us, we will be talking with Jake and Katie Reese from Reese Rodeo in just a little bit. But I've had some people ask me off the air, and I don't know if we've ever dove into it, but luckily Priscilla DeGregory put together a kind of a look at what would happen if Trump is found guilty. Now, the deliberations, day 2, begins this morning at 9:30. I know there was a lot of talk. We'll discuss a little bit about the notes and what they're asked, and some speculating it could be over today. Others predicting, and this was yesterday, they predicted Friday. I guess time will tell on that. It's going to be interesting when that coverage breaks, no matter what it is. We know that it's been told, I believe anonymous sources, that the Biden administration has a prepared speech to break live on television, no matter what the verdict. But what happens if Trump is found guilty? This is what people have asked me, and luckily they put together kind of a tutorial on this. Trump faces 34 counts of falsifying business records connected to allegations he made that a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. Now, you and I know the precedent this sets, not just from the lawfare aspect of it, the going after your political opponent, what Bragg's intention is with this. We know all of that. We don't even really know what the crime is. But we also know that the precedent that's set in the future, does that mean anybody who runs a campaign who tries to keep something quiet? I don't care if it's their voting record. I mean, isn't some of Biden's record still sealed? I mean, is any of that Well, think about the Hunter laptop scenario. Would that have been a way, when that was being censored, is that a way to sway the presidential election? But anyway, each of the counts that Trump faces comes with a maximum penalty of 4 years imprisonment. So in theory, though highly unlikely, but nothing is, I don't know if anything in regards to this is highly unlikely with what we've seen. But Trump could face 136 years behind bars if convicted on all counts and given consecutive sentences. Now it is far more likely that he would be given concurrent sentences for each of the 34 counts, meaning the most likely maximum he'd face is 4 years behind bars. So he could face 4 years behind bars. It's also possible the judge would not sentence him to time behind bars. I could see it being a scenario like we heard so often with trying to get Trump off the ballot, where the statement, what was the statement exactly? We talked about it on the show a lot. We understand the consequences, and we studied this with a heavy heart. But we had to, that kind of idea, that really over the top. We understand, but this is a historical, unprecedented stance. But just so you know, I did not take this lightly. That was one of the terms. We did not take this lightly. So I'm not sure. It's also not clear if prosecutors and Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office would seek a sentence of incarceration, another big if, given Trump's charged with a non-violent offense and hasn't been convicted of any other crimes. I don't know. Again, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? With everything else we've seen, with the decisions the judge has made so far. The presumptive Republican presidential nominee would not be able to pardon himself of a conviction in this case if he was reelected and became the 47th president, since it's a state case and not a federal one. But somehow they're investigating, or for some reason part of this is federal. That's where it gets really wonky. The real estate tycoon would face the same limitations if he were convicted in the Georgia election fraud case and reelected, since that also charges him with state crimes and not federal ones. He also faces 2 other criminal cases. I wasn't winking at you. Sorry, I had something in my eye. He also faces 2 other criminal cases in federal court for allegedly mishandling classified documents and for conspiring to overturn the 2020 election, for which, in theory, he'd be able to pardon himself. So again, isn't this nice? The lawfare that is now being involved in the precedent this sets. And they tell us, don't worry, it's only going to be for Trump. He could order the Justice Department to drop federal offenses he faces, but he very likely would face legal challenges in such a move. Now, here's a big question that's been asked. Could Trump run for office and serve as president from behind bars? Legal experts have said that nothing in the U.S. Constitution would prevent Trump from running for office or even serving as president from behind bars. There are 2 prior examples of individuals running for president while incarcerated, including in 1920 with socialist candidate Eugene Debs, and he threw his hat in the ring while serving a 10-year term for sedition in a Georgia federal prison. So I guess President says he can. Incredibly, he garnered nearly 1 million votes at the time, or 3.5% of the popular vote. I'll remember this name. The second example came in 1992 when conspiracy theorist and far-right activist, it says, Lyndon LaRoche ran while serving time for mail fraud. If Trump won the White House bid, he would face significant logistical challenges in serving for prison, but legal experts have said the unique scenario isn't out of the question. While some of the president's duties could be handled from behind bars, like issuing executive orders and pardons, signing and vetoing bills, and making political appointments, others, such as having the briefcase with the nuclear launch codes nearby, could be trickier, but not insurmountable. Harvard constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe previously said. Listen, I know I said this yesterday. We see this for what it is, but also please be very, very cautious in thinking the jury is going to see it for what it is. For the judge to allow it to go this far when there isn't a clear crime, as Trump said yesterday, and I'm seeing some legal experts whose analysis I really enjoy and I really think is brilliant analysis most of the time. almost parsing what they're saying as, yeah, this isn't right, but it's still up to the jury, deep blue New York jury. So there's going to be probably some level of guilt here, is what I've seen many people say. Now, that's why I'm just saying, don't get, you might scoff and go, this is such a joke. This jury's going to throw this out, and this was all a waste of time. It was just a way to keep Trump off of campaigning, and then also embarrass him with Stormy Daniels getting to give all that information, which still makes absolutely no sense why that was ever part of that trial. It's all about that. But that's not, that makes common sense to you and I. But don't get your hopes up and that you know what the decision's finally going to be. I'm just saying, just be cautious. Now, what are the jurors looking at as they consider whether Donald Trump was guilty or not? Where there are 34 different business documents falsified. Were these? Okay, that's the question they're going to be asked, or they are dealing with right now. Jurors were presented with 34 different business records that prosecutors say were tied to Trump's alleged reimbursement of the hush money his former fixer, Michael Cohen, paid to Daniels. For each of the 34 records, juries will be tasked with deciding whether they are false beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence presented by prosecutors at the 7-week trial in Manhattan Supreme Court showed that Cohen received $35,000 per month from Trump's trust account through 2017. Jurors also saw the handwriting of Cohen and then Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisenberg on a document describing a scheme to pay Cohen a grossed-up sum of $420,000 that year, including a bonus, and to account for income taxes he'd have to pay. Cohen and Weisenberger wrote these notes on a copy of a bank statement that described Cohen's shell company paying Daniels' lawyers $130,000 in October of 2016. Yet the Trump company documents, including 11 invoices, 12 vouchers, and 11 checks, all describe the purpose of Cohen's payments as phony legal services rather than as paychecks for silencing Stormy Daniels, prosecutors said. Did Trump have intent to cover up a conspiracy to elect him in 2016 by unlawful means? I mean, I guess I'm naive, and I don't know. I'm not saying Trump is guilty of this. All I'm saying is when it comes to any presidential election, gubernatorial, senatorial, congressional, quote, the intent to cover up a conspiracy to get them elected by unlawful means. Now, you could argue the unlawful means. You could argue the definition of conspiracy. But to cover up, I mean, is a new precedent being set that if you're running for something, you have to go out there and say, oh, yeah, here's every skeleton in my closet. Good luck. I mean, it's nonsensical. If they choose to unanimously find him guilty of the first-degree falsifying business records, the jury needs to then find that Trump fudged the records with the intent to cover up another crime. That crime, according to prosecutors, is a New York state law that makes it illegal to enter into a conspiracy to get someone elected to public office by unlawful means. David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, testified to working with Trump and Cohen to bury women's stories about affairs with Trump and to publish puff pieces extolling his virtues. Jurors need to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump had the intent defined as conscious, objective, or purpose to cover up this alleged conspiracy. But prosecutors need not prove that the other crime was in fact committed, Justice Juan Merchant explained Wednesday. Boy, they're having issues. But in other words, to convict, jurors need to believe that the conspiracy existed and that Trump tried to conceal it, but don't need to believe that the conspiracy happened beyond a reasonable doubt. You found all this? Do you understand why they asked for the instructions from the judge again during the deliberation yesterday? And what were those unlawful means? Jurors have three choices. If jurors make it this far, they then have to decide whether they believe that the alleged 2016 election conspiracy, which involves hush money payouts to both Daniels and Karen McDougal, were done using what are called unlawful means. But panelists can take a choice, the kind of a choose-your-own-adventure path to deciding what those unlawful means are. They have three choices. According to Merchant, they could find that the hush money payouts breach federal campaign finance laws. Now, how can a state jury decide that if it breached federal campaign laws? I'm still confused about that. They could find that the hush money payouts breached federal campaign finance laws by exceeding the $2,700 cap on individual donations to campaigns, but only if the payouts would have happened anyway wouldn't have happened anyway if Trump wasn't running, the judge said. Jurors could also find that the hush money payouts violated tax law, or that more business records were falsified during the alleged conspiracy. For example, jurors could find that the unlawful means are that Cohen fudged records by not being honest with banks when he created his shell companies that he used for the payoffs, Merchant said. Jurors, if they choose to convict, have to agree unanimously that the unlawful means happened, but they could individually believe that Trump, Cohen, and Pecker used different underlying unlawful means and still convict, the judge said. I'm sorry for this. I know I'm running late, and I'm sorry. It's probably, if you're just waking up, could Trump be found guilty? Last section here. Found guilty on some other count. The jury could also choose to acquit Trump on all of the counts for which he would not be allowed to be retried, or to convict him on some of the counts, like, for example, the checks that he signed himself. They could also fail to come to a unanimous verdict and deadlock, in which case a judge could order a mistrial. Why that's important is any new trial would almost certainly not happen until after November's presidential election, if at all. All right, there we are. We're all caught up on the wonkiness of the trial. We've got more to talk about with it, but hopefully a little more interesting, a little more straightforward. I do not envy the jurist or the jury today because I don't know. Again, I don't have a strong opinion. I'm not going to make any prediction one way or the other. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. What do you think is going to happen? What day are they going to come in? And what do you think the ultimate verdict is going to be? There, I'll pose the question to you. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And we are back, Frankly Speaking, here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson's studio. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up in just a few moments, we're going to be talking with Jake and Katie from Reese Rodeo. I think you're going to enjoy that interview. All right, so everybody has the what you need to know from the first day of jury deliberation. Basically, I think what we know, a couple notes got passed, some questions were asked. The judge was again asked to give his instructions. I mean, that's how confusing this all is. But they will return this morning at 9:30 to resume deliberations. But the 12 men and women will also again hear from Judge Juan Merchant. He was asked to kind of he was asked to go through his instructions again on the law that he had given them earlier Wednesday morning. The jurors requested 4 pieces of testimony. The testimony the jurors are requesting relates to interactions Trump had directly with Pecker. The jury will ultimately decide whether a former president is convicted of felony crimes for the first time in American history, at the same time that Trump is running again against President Joe Biden. The political implications of the case were not overtly at issue on Wednesday morning, as Merchant spent an hour instructing the jury on the law. He explained the 34 counts against Trump for falsifying business records over the reimbursement to Cohen for hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels. Merchant also reminded jurors they must put aside their biases as they decide the defendant's fate. Wouldn't that have been nice from the judge from the beginning? I mean, I think what most people, I shouldn't say, I hate when people do that, but most people would say, this will be appealed, and I'm sure it'll get overturned on appeal if he's found guilty. But the fact of the matter is, it's the time frame on that. Again, the lawfare. So I would love for you to make your predictions. Do you believe Trump will be found guilty, a hung jury, acquitted? And I'm not asking you what you think it should be, because I think that's the problem I find myself in. I know what I think it should be. What do you think those jurors in blue New York City, deep blue New York City, what do you believe they will ultimately decide? You see the number on your bottom of your screen. Please, at any point, reach out and let me know your predictions, as the verdict could be in as soon as today. But Merchant said, put aside your biases. Not unlike I've done, but put aside your biases. Quote, remember, you have promised to be a fair juror. A fair juror is a person who will keep their promise to be fair and impartial, and who will not permit the verdict to be influenced by bias or prejudice in favor of or against a person who appeared in this trial. Merchant also asked the jury to clarify Thursday morning whether they wanted the entire hour-long presentation to be read back this morning or if there were just portions of it they needed to hear one more time. Now, this is interesting, and it's a New York state law on this, but the jurors were not allowed to give or were not allowed to keep the instructions. Merchant had a copy of them, and that's just according to Ellie Honing. It's the way New York state courts do it. They're obstinate. They're stuck in the past. They're making life difficult for the jury, so that's why they have to go back to the judge and have him reread it. Oh, I agree. Got a comment from a viewer. Frank, it's time for you to scale the building to fix the street cam. I know, the roof camera. They got hit by lightning. Biden's motorcade could stop by the ice cream store any day now, and I don't want to miss it. That's a very good point. At any moment. Maybe even to celebrate whatever the verdict is. Come down to the ice cream store, and we don't want to miss it. Thank you. I know I missed it too. We're in the works of getting a new one, but I appreciate the sentiment because I would agree with you as well. Now, when we come back, we are going to hear from our friends Jake and Katie from Reese Rodeo during the Steuben Senior Services Fund section of our program. After that, we've got a few pieces here about what others had to say. Marco Rubio, yesterday it was reported that Marco Rubio wants to be VP, but he doesn't want to do the whole audition. But he was outspoken yesterday about what he feels this case is like, what this trial is like. And then Norman Eisen from CNN, I love headlines like this. I've observed the Trump jury. Here's what could be happening in deliberations. So we'll go through a little bit of those when we have time. But that's after we talk with Reese Rodeo. Find out more at ReeseRanchRodeo.com. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, we will be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting from the Hesselson studio, and this is the Steuben Senior Services Fund section of our program. And I'd like to welcome to the show Jake and Katie. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Tell us about Reese Rodeo. This is opening weekend, right?
Yep.
And so and you've got a really impressive lineup this year. How many events do you have?
We have 10 rodeos throughout this season from next Saturday, June 1st to end of September.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of planning involved in each one? Have you been planning all year is basically what I'm asking?
Yeah, we take a couple months off during the winter, but it's pretty much planning for the rest of the year.
So what will opening night be like? Relief, stress? Will you get to enjoy it?
When it's over, it'll be relief. But
Yeah.
doing some mutton busting and some bull riding,
Oh,
some
yeah.
barrel racing. It'll be a lot of fun.
And I want to talk about that because I want to know what a typical event is like for someone who maybe hasn't been to the rodeo before. But one thing I want to stress, because if someone hasn't been to the rodeo, they may not know these are family-friendly events, and it's really an afternoon of family-friendly fun. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, our gates open at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We start horse events at around 4, and then it kind of goes on from there. We do have like little games for kids. We have like a little petting zoo that we kind of add to every year. So we usually have goats and donkeys at least in there.
Yeah.
The Farm Bureau, they come and set up, give out stuff.
T-shirts and
Usually,
stuff.
they usually have a cow that the kids can milk.
Oh, wow.
A fake cow. And there's food, games. We always have music. There's adult beverages for the adults as well.
Wow. So you can really make an afternoon of this. How late
Yeah.
does it typically go to?
10:30, 11.
Oh, wow. So that is a whole day
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
fun. What a great price, too.
Yeah, it's
You really can't
$15,
beat it.
yeah.
And when everybody's talking about having, the prices of things going up and not having a lot to do, what a great event to take your family to. What is a typical event like outside of what we just talked about in the early afternoon?
We start the day out with the horse barrel racing, and the girls all qualify. We'll have 75 entries of just barrel racing.
Oh, wow.
And we qualify all them down to the top 15, and the top 15 make it to the show.
Okay.
So when you do get to see the show, it's the best of the best. And
And we usually start with the main show at 7. We start with we do a grand entry and cowboy prayer and all that, and then we do kids mutton busting is the first event.
Yeah.
So we usually have 10 little sheep riders and they go out first. Then we do some roping. We have team roping and girls breakaway roping.
Okay.
And then some more barrel racing and bull riding and flip flop in between, back and forth, and it goes. I don't
It
know.
goes quick for
Yeah,
how
it
long
goes
Sure.
it
quick.
is. Yeah.
Well, how do people get involved on the back end of it? Like they join the rodeo. This is just a question because I don't know the answer to it. Like, how do you get everybody involved to participate?
The bull riders, I mean, a lot of them are following a circuit, and
Okay, that's
they'll
what I
hook up
wondered.
with us
Okay.
along the way. But we do get your bucket listers every once in a while,
Yeah.
just to get a random guy that wants to try it, just to say he tried it. And
We are an open event, so
Okay.
we
Yeah.
don't have, we're not sanctioned, so really, we get the best of the horse riders, and then we get people that are just beginning as well.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So we have all different classes, so anyone can really join.
Now, how long have you been doing this?
It's 2010.
2010. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And I'm sure you have some a loyal following at this
We
point.
do.
Yeah.
We've
Oh,
got
yeah.
great people that've been with us the whole time.
People looking forward to the season opener. And you can get season tickets.
Yes. Yes, you can. Get on Reese Ranch Rodeo webpage, and it'll direct you to everything you need to know.
Now, I'm sure there's a great background story. Maybe not. What originally got you interested in a rodeo? Is that how you would say that? How would I say that?
Yeah.
In the rodeo?
In building a rodeo.
Yeah.
It was an
Yeah.
accident that panned out pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. Who hasn't been there?
Yeah.
We just started out building our own arena out of
To
like
practice.
steel panels that nobody could really climb out of or get out of, and
Yeah.
just to practice. And then everybody brought coolers, and then there's cactuses everywhere.
The neighbors
like,
would show up and just sit on dirt
neighbors
piles,
would show
hanging
up
out and
and-
watching. And
Yeah, and then eventually got bigger and bigger, and like, so we said, well, we might as well, do this legit,
Yeah.
make a business out of it,
For sure.
and so it went from there.
What would you say it's like running a rodeo?
People have no idea how much work it is.
I'm sure it is. No, it sounds like it would be a lot of work.
Because we have real jobs too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Real jobs.
Yeah, we have real
it's
jobs.
not just a farm or a rodeo; it's also a farm. I mean,
Yeah.
when the rodeo's not going on, it's still an active farm because we have all the animals we still have to take care of and
Yep.
everything else. So you got the stresses of the rodeo, and then
Sure. Well, it also sounds like the day itself, at least for you, would be stressful because it's not like you have one competition and you're done. You have everything that you're talking about, just getting that set up in the logistics. Would you say that's something you learned over time, or
Yeah.
is it still improving? Like, how's that work?
Yeah. Well, we say every year it should get easier because we've been doing this for so long, but then we add on like something new.
Yeah.
Or like,
Yeah.
This year we went to online ticket sales and ticket scanners, and so
Oh, geez.
so it's
Yeah.
just like every year we add on something new or try to improve, so
Yeah.
it doesn't get any easier.
and we're fortunate with the people that we surround ourselves with, that they've been very helpful. I mean, we've got some key players that help us make sure we get it done.
And you're also, I'm sure you're always looking, I was on your website, ReeseRanchRodeo.com, and I'm sure you've got sponsors that help out a lot. Volunteers? Do you have volunteers? So it is kind of a community aspect to get the
Yes.
rodeo
Yeah.
running.
Yes.
Yep, the day of we hire probably 30 people probably.
Yeah, close to. Yeah.
Close to 30 people to help run everything. So
Up until then, it's
up
just
until
us.
then,
but
it's pretty much
us and our
us.
kids.
No
Yeah.
kidding. So it's a family event,
It
and
is.
it's family friendly. So you've got a lot going for you. So
Yeah.
before we go, I should ask, and I know I kind of alluded to this at the very beginning, but what would you say to someone who's watching this right now and thinking, I've never been to a rodeo or anything like this? What should they know? What would you tell them?
Prepare for a good time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is awesome. It's
Yeah,
great.
we also have a clown entertainer.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, that we have one for every rodeo, and we have
Like a rodeo clown, like
Yeah.
literally a rodeo clown.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And like him and the announcer, their banter, they make the show.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I
They're
mean?
amazing,
Everything
yes.
else is just filling in something to watch. But it's just, even if you're not like, thinking rodeo, but it's really a good time.
Yeah, I don't know how you couldn't have fun.
It's a production. I
Yeah.
mean,
It is a
it is a
production.
show.
Oh, sure.
I mean, we're putting on a show, and people are. I mean, that's their event. They're there to win.
Right.
So I mean, it's a lot of fun.
And it must get very, I just thought of this, so I know I said the last question, but it must get very competitive.
It is. Yes.
Let me tell you what the barrel racing last year was
Yeah.
dynamite.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had Well, we started out with the 75 people that sign up, but by the time
It's narrowed
the
down to
show
15.
came, it was narrowed down to 15, and each one of them was in 15 to 16 second range. It
Wow.
was amazing.
Yeah, and they're
So fast.
0.003 seconds off of
Oh
each
my
other.
gosh.
I mean, I
you
love
know
bull
what I
riding,
mean?
but the barrel racing last year
But
was
yeah,
dynamite.
Is that
they're
right?
all competing for money and awards.
Well, of course.
At the end of the
Yep.
year
And honor.
stuff, so.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right. I mean, you put that
Yeah.
whole summer into it, or more than
Yeah.
that, probably train year round, I would assume.
Right.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Wow, this is fascinating. You guys have sold me. I'm definitely coming up. Zap and I, we already talked about it. We're gonna go see. We're gonna come up. It's at 4115 Oldfield Drive in Corning, right down the road. Where can people find out more? Just Reese Ranch Rodeo, .com, the best place to go.
And our Facebook pages.
Okay,
Yep.
so Facebook. Well, best of luck with the season opener and the whole season. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
I
for having
appreciate
us.
it.
Of course. All right, we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you again to Jake and Katie from ReeseRanchRodeo.com, or from Reese Rodeo. Doesn't that sound like a lot of fun? We talk about a time when prices are so high for everything, and not there. What a fun afternoon and evening of entertainment for just $15. You have 10 opportunities throughout the summer. I'd highly recommend it. And I want to thank them for being a guest on the program this morning. We received a lot of comments. So the question is, what do you think the verdict will be in Trump's trial? Not what you hope it'll be, what you think it'll be. And we got some great comments. First off, viewer number one, they will find him guilty. Hopefully there'll be one that will do the right thing, but it's New York City. Very similar, another viewer saying about the same, and I think we all now have somewhat of the same opinion on this, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. I would like to think that the justice and common sense would and should prevail, but this is New York City. It all goes back to that, doesn't it? And the hate and corruption is beyond the pale, so I fear the worst, I must say. But God willing, the jurors will see this for what it is, and some brave soul will do the right thing. So two people saying, please, one person doing the right thing. And I agree with you. And I agree with you. What's interesting about that is that we all see it for what it is. And we're thinking maybe it's that one person. But think of the implications there of that one person. I was having this conversation with somebody just yesterday. Not only are you ostracized in that jury room, you will be demonized by the press, and really have to fear for your safety. That's unfortunate to say, but I do believe we're at that point. I think it will, that person, his or her name and information would be released very, very quickly. Another comment from Ken in Horsehead said, Merchant will manipulate the system and the jurors to get a guilty verdict. He knows that this is his charge from the Democrats and will twist himself and the law and his dignity into a pretzel to accomplish it. His motivation will be revered. His motivation will be being revered by the Democrats. More monetary support for his daughter's fundraising, possibly a lucrative book deal, and a substantial position in the upcoming Democrat administration. He will put Trump under house arrest to keep him off the campaign trail. He also knows that his work will be turned over on appeal, but the damage will have been done. Yes, I would agree with the house arrest. I don't think they realize the optics of putting him in jail. And I don't think they want that. But they can say, in their mind, take the high ground and say, you know what? Not going to do that to a president. We're going to keep you on house arrest. Knowing the implications that has for a campaign for president of the United States. So very similar opinions. Time will tell. Now, keep those and keep your, I hate using the term prediction, but what do you think is going to happen? Please feel free to weigh in. So Norman Eisen from CNN says, I've observed the Trump jury. Here's what could happen in deliberations. And he goes through the whole process, and it's actually a relatively boring article. But he says, in my over 30 years of legal experience, and from sitting in this courtroom during weeks of testimony, I have never seen a more well-educated, attentive, and determined jury than this one. I am confident they will lead each other on a meticulous exploration of the evidence and consider carefully how to apply the law to it. So I have a sneaking suspicion if it is a hung jury or if he was acquitted, which seems very unlikely, that Norman Eisen may not have the same opinion of this jury walking on water and being perhaps the best jury in jury history. But he said, we got proof of that, how great they are. At 2:56 p.m. when the jury sent a 4-part note to the judge requesting information about a series of communications involving former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, including his direct communications with Trump about aspects of the alleged catch and kill conspiracy to benefit his campaign. While reading jury notes as if it were tea leaves can be treacherous, the note feels to me like an ominous sign for the former president. Oh, so that's why this jury is so perfect and wonderful and probably the best jury to ever be a jury in the history of jurying, because the notes said, or it didn't look good for Trump. We will see how long their deliberations take, but this afternoon's development suggests there will not be an instant process, nor should it be, not for any defendant, but particularly not for this one. Well, Marco Rubio. Oh, here we got another comment from a viewer. I agree that one person would have a bounty on their head, and how sad is that? They said we need a David praying. Yeah, I think that it's very scary. If it is just one, it's a lot easier if there's a few. But if there's just one saying, we're staying away, that we're not, that this one person is going to say, I am not going along with the herd mentality, the New York City herd Judge Meechan mentality. It would take courage. It would take a lot of conviction, but it would also, unfortunately, be involved with a lot of fear after the fact, a lot of threats and the like. You can see the writing on the wall. Here's another comment. The judge will overrule and do something to Trump. Okay. Hey, I like all the predictions. Keep them coming in. This is the hot topic, of course, of the century, because there's the greatest jury Norman Eisen's ever seen. Marco Rubio says that the Trump trial, and remember, Marco Rubio, it is being reported, wants to be vice president. His name, we've been told, also is on the short list. He compared the Trump business records trial to be the sham trial the old Soviet Union used to use against political opponents. CNN reported that Merchant told jurors that they must be unanimous if they find Trump guilty on each count, on whether he committed the crime personally, acted in concert with others, or both. Now, Marco Rubio tweeted, judge in Trump case in New York City just told jury they don't have to unanimously agree on which crime was committed, as long as they all at least pick one. And that, among the crimes they could pick from, are ones Trump wasn't even charged with. This is exactly the kind of sham trial used against political opponents of the regime in the old Soviet Union. What a great point, though, by Marco Rubio there. And something that perhaps passed by in the conversation. Jonathan Turley reported Merchant said that there was no need to agree on what occurred. They could disagree on what the crime was among the three choices. Thus, that means that they could split 4, 4, and 4, and he will still treat that as unanimous. Think of that. Think of how, and that's Jonathan Turley saying that. Think of how this has been set up. So to Marco Rubio's point, and to our viewer's point, who said that Merchant's going to tie himself up into a pretzel to get this guilty verdict, I want to reread that from Rubio. Judge in Trump case in New York City just told jury they don't have to unanimously agree on which crime was committed, as long as they all at least pick one. And that among the crimes they can pick from are ones that Trump wasn't even charged with. That is exactly the kind of sham trial used against Trump political opponents in the regime in the old Soviet Union. A great point. Several other members of the Republican Party, including Vivek Ramaswamy and Senator J.D. Vance, have described the Trump trial as being a sham. Trump's attorney was on, Alina Habba, was on Fox News Channel's The Story with Shannon Breen. Habba said Joe Biden, unfortunately, can't really do anything in office. So he's got to use the same means as somebody who's just trying to have a quick slip and fall and make some money. And that is, frankly, what we're seeing right now. This is exactly a Biden show because he's got to distract the American people. Bream said, but the Biden administration is not responsible for this trial. Hobbit responded, how can you say the Biden administration is not responsible for this trial? Well, Bream said, it's a state trial. It's Alvin Bragg. Whatever you think there's a political motive for him, it's not connected to the DOJ. I mean, the feds passed on these election charges. Hobbit said, Shannon, you should look at how many logs they have of state officials, Letitia James, Fannie Willis, visiting the White House, and then tell me that this is not a Biden trial. Bragg passed on this case. You know when it came back? It came back when he decided to run for office. Donald Trump saying, and I'm sure, oh, wow, I'm running late. Well, we'll tell you what Donald Trump said. Keep those predictions coming in. They're great. Though I think we all sound a little jaded. And I think, unfortunately, from necessity. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. We are back with Frankly Speaking. Not enough time to even play the music. Thank you for joining us and receiving some more comments. Keep them coming in before we wrap things up here. Donald Trump saying yesterday, Mother Teresa could not beat these charges, but we'll see. We'll see how we do. It's a very disgraceful situation. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. We're going to take back our country from these fascists and these thugs that are destroying us with inflation and with everything they do. Allowing 15, 16, 17 million people into our country, totally unvetted, totally unchecked. We're going to bring back our nation. November 5th, remember, most important day in the history of our country. In the meantime, this trial is rigged. Jonathan Turley tweeting out, after the federal election violation, Merchant says that the second crime is falsifying other documents. This creates a redundancy with the New York election violation on the falsifying documents. It allows the government to allege the falsification of documents as a felony, and then, so a dead misdemeanor for falsifying business records was zapped back into life by alleging that under New York Election Law 17-152, it was done to influence the election by the unlawful means of falsification of business records. It's so circular as to produce vertigo. CNN, the jury instructions, I don't want to go through all the instructions because we've already probably had enough of that. And we'll hear more on it. But the president, former president, Donald Trump said, you have a very, very, I mean, this is very unfair, is what I'm not campaigning in this room all day long, from morning to night, for this Biden witch hunt. He lamented that a lot of key witnesses were not called by the prosecution. He says should have been. He didn't name names due to the gag order, saying because of the gag order, I won't go down into individual names, but you have a lot of big players, very big players that would have solved their problem or actually would have given us the win. We already have the win if we have a fair judge. This case would have been over a long time ago. The other thing, the confusion is nobody knows what the crime is because there is no crime. Nobody knows what the crime is. The DA didn't name the crime. They don't know what the crime is. That's what the problem is. It's a disgrace. This thing ought to be ended immediately. The judge ought to end it and save his reputation. We've got more comments coming in. We're going to change the topic, but I want you to continue to make your prediction on what will happen. If a juror willingly makes their identity known, they've brought any turmoil they may come of on themselves. I will say about that message from a viewer, I don't think it'll be someone making their identity known. I believe their identity will be made known, and that's not conspiratorial. Listen, if the Supreme Court isn't safe from leaks, if you recall that, I'm just not overly confident. Or maybe you could just say, going back, I'm jaded. The judge's mission statement, and this is from a different viewer. The judge's mission statement is bring down Trump at any cost. Be prepared for shock and awe. I think you're going to see protests. I do. I think the election will be a lot different because this is being seen. Listen, we had that quote from David Quaid, the actor, who basically said, I don't want to vote for Trump, but what they've done, the weaponization of the judicial system is wrong, and the precedent that sets for this country is terrifying. So even though I don't like Trump, I'm going to vote for Trump. He said it in a little more colorful language, but I thought it was a good point. This has changed a lot of people's minds because they see it for what it is. Now, let's get away from it, but again, you can continue to comment on your predictions. I did want to mention, because I highlighted this at the beginning of the show, RFK Jr. is accusing CNN of excluding him from the presidential debates. I had mentioned this on the program that because I think it was Axios that put together that he's making his way, he could actually be in a presidential debate. And I said at the time, well, no, the commission's not involved. And so CNN wanting this debate so badly, the one that maybe that Trump might have to do from prison over Zoom, they're going to want this so badly that CNN, that is, that they're not going to allow the third party because both Trump and Biden don't want RFK Jr. in there. So he was complaining. He said that CNN colluded with the Biden and Trump teams to exclude him from the debates, employing criteria that were designed to result in the selection of certain pre-chosen candidates. In response to the complaint, CNN cited its eligibility thresholds for debates, which require a candidate to appear on a sufficient number of state ballots to reach the 270 electoral vote threshold to win the presidency prior to the eligibility deadline, and attain at least 15% in 4 separate national polls of registered or likely voters that meet CNN's standards for reporting. The law is virtually every state provides that the nominee of a state-recognized political party will be allowed ballot access without petitioning. As a presumptive nominee for the party, both Biden and Trump will satisfy this requirement. As an independent candidate under applicable laws, RFK Jr. does not. Now, a majority of Americans, as I get ready to go to break, a majority of Americans say they are closely following news about the 2024 presidential election, but at the same time, they're worn out by it. This is coming from Pew Research. I'm not going to go through the numbers because it's just not that interesting. But a majority of Americans closely following the election, they just don't want to. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking as we get ready to wrap things up on the Thursday morning edition. It is 7:52. Stay with us. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, just looking at our last comments before we wrap things up. Does anybody think that the lawyers on the jury will be part of finding other than guilty? Their careers will be ended in New York if they don't find him guilty. I think there's a lot of careers in there. I think there's a teacher, others. If they find him not guilty, yes, their careers and livelihoods will be gone. As stated, if the precedent is set, that this is terrifying to me and should be to anyone with a pulse and functioning brain. I think there's that, the term that Trump always uses, Trump derangement syndrome. At the end of the day, they are only focused on one thing, and that's bringing down Trump. So there's many that don't care about the precedent that's being set. Another comment, you're not jaded. History tells us that Democrats will dox anybody that doesn't fall in line with their agenda. Yes, that's the point I was mentioning. It follows Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. The ends justify the means. Yeah, I believe dox is the right term. I don't see a scenario. Listen, if the Supreme Court had confidential information released, you're telling me this New York City courthouse wouldn't have that happen as well? And don't think for a moment that's not playing in the minds of some of those jurors that are sitting back there knowing that if they take a strong stance, all their fellow jury members are going to hate them. There's going to be a lot of people in the media, in their daily life that will as well. Going back to the elections before we wrap things up, big stars come out for Biden, but much of Hollywood wrestles with 2024 endorsements in a polarized world. This is an 8-page document from CNN, and it goes through them. And I don't know if this is successful. I know I mentioned this in, I think, the 6 o'clock hour, maybe the beginning of the hour. I don't think, in my opinion, I think it's very much Clinton-esque when Hillary had all the celebrities around her. Did that work at the end of the day when people are going, man, I can't pay for groceries, everything's so expensive, but this Hollywood elite that showed up in their limousine and their private jet is telling me who I should vote for just because I like their music or I like their movie? I mean, and then you look at kind of the unhinged ranting of Robert De Niro, which I was surprised at how many people spoke to me. Some who I would say were maybe not even Trump supporters, but saying that was weird. It was uncomfortable. But the idea here is they're almost throwing the wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the Hollywood celebrities. You better endorse because there's a threat there that if you don't, you'll be deemed as not supportive enough. But there is, and there's a whole section there about Genocide Joe, the idea that because of his support for Israel, that maybe some Hollywood celebrities won't want to endorse because the young people then may turn on them. Here's another piece from CNN. Eric Ryerson. To those world leaders privately rooting for Biden, now is your chance. And the headline that you click on was a lot different. Like, dear Americans, you should care what the world thinks about you. The stakes of this election are too high for global leaders to stay mum. Hopefully more of them speak up about the dangers of a second go-around with Trump. And hopefully some Americans, particularly in those swing states, will be listening. Yeah, Hollywood celebrities, other world leaders, I know that's how I decide my vote at the end of the day. I'm sure you do too. So again, we're going to be watching. How about this? Biden's co-chair, Lisa Blunt Rochester, said a lot of people are going through a lot of struggles right now, coming out of the pandemic, and they're not even aware of the things that this administration has done to really uplift our communities. So you might be struggling. You don't realize how good Biden has been for you. That's an interesting campaign slogan. Those who are struggling don't realize how good Biden's been for them. And Biden snapped at a reporter over a question about handing over power to Kamala Harris during the second term. He doesn't like when he gets tough questions, saying, "Did you fall on your head? Are you all right? You got hurt, aren't you? I'm serious." We are out of time. Thank you for all the comments. As you can imagine, tomorrow will be a busy day, depending, even if not, if there's a verdict. But we'll be talking about it on tomorrow's program. Thank you to everybody who joined us this morning. Thank you to Jake and Katie from Reese Rodeo. Join us tomorrow morning, starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking, right here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I look forward to it already.